Perfect. So, hi everyone that's joining in a webinar. Anyway, so this is a program on getting good color skin tone with Lightroom, and we're also going to kind of talk about a lot of things too. But before we go on, this program is primarily sponsored by BenQ. I'll show you a few slides, and we'll kind of walk through the program from there. So, I'm Art Suwansang. I am a photographer. Uh, you can find me on Facebook should you want to add me to your friends and so forth. I would love to have that. That would be great. So anyway, you can find me there. I'm a wedding photographer, Wedding 64. It's my wedding photography company, and primarily I do, well, obviously wedding portrait work. I also photograph architecture, portrait for people. So I do a lot of different kind of works as well in photography. If you want to follow us on the Facebook page, you can do that. So anyway. So like I said, this program is sponsored by BenQ. Great to have them on board to kind of work with us on this. And, our kind of partner that we work with for this one as well as X-Rite Photo and Video. And what you'll see in this program is that I use X-Rite devices to calibrate the BenQ monitor. So there is, a connection with the two. So I'm going to kind of show you that later in this program as well. So primarily what we're going to cover in this webinar today is I'm going to start out with Lightroom, and then what we're going to do is kind of jump into Lightroom, briefly kind of talk about skin tone color correction, how do you approach it, how I do mine to get the skin tone fairly consistent in multiple different lighting conditions of a single subject I photograph. And then what happened is afterwards we'll come back to the keynote here, or PowerPoint, and then what we're going to do is kind of briefly chat about color, talk about color a little bit. I'm going to share with you the display that I use for my color workflow and also the color calibrator I use. I'll talk a little bit about why I choose to use these tools and how I calibrate my system. And at the very end, we'll do a Q&A. So I believe there is a question pod somewhere on your screen with GoToWebinar, so you can go ahead and enter the question in pod. I have Dave that's going to be he's the moderator, and he's going to be answering some of the questions, and at the end what I'll do is I'll also pick some of the questions to answer that for you guys as well. So feel free to ask any question you like, but I won't be checking that until the very end of the webinar. All right, perfect. Let's kind of jump into Lightroom first. So what I'm going to do here is probably take about, I say about 15 minutes to 20 minutes or so, just kind of talking about color correction in Lightroom in general, how to get good skin tone. So a lot of what you see on the screen right now is I have just kind of like the different colors compare. So what you see is a picture that's been skin tone color corrected, and a picture, let me get larger, there we go, and a picture that's kind of the original version of the way how they're shot, and you can kind of see that the color varies throughout. So what we're going to do is I'll kind of take us through some of these and kind of just show you my editing and kind of how I work through them. So let's kind of pick a challenging one, for instance, to start out with. Also, something to think about as well is that I'm probably going to hear this as a question or as a comment in the question pod somehow, that your color is going to look different than than what I'm describing on your screen. So that's something to think about as well, as that you may not be on a fully color managed system yet. So that's something to kind of consider and think about at the same time. So when I do color editing in Lightroom, let's kind of pick let's pick this photo here. What I'm going to do is make a virtual copy and let's work with it. So this is kind of my edited version, and this is kind of how it was captured originally. Now this picture, if we look at compare the before and after, it's not so much of a big challenge in terms of editing, but what I have done here is through the editing process in Lightroom, I have brought back her skin tone by a great degree, so you get to see a lot of her skin tonalities, skin textures, and so forth, which is really kind of nice. So let's talk about how I do that in general. So we're going to go here, and we'll go into the Develop module. Let's go into full screen mode here. So one of the things is that Lightroom, in this latest iteration, Lightroom, right, actually the funny thing is Lightroom just updated, I think last night on my computer, so I'm now running 2016.9, which is the latest release. It's kind of cool. But anyway, Lightroom has been having six basic adjustment sliders for the past, since Lightroom 4, actually. Now, the thing is that, I do volume work, so I not only just, come in and decide to pull the slider up and edit one picture at a time. Normally what I do is I work through multiple photos in terms of thousands of photos from a wedding at any given time. So what I have come up with is kind of a very interesting formula and approach to how I do color correction. And if you guys want to take notes or take this formula and use it, feel free to do so. It's a little bit heavy-handed for some, but I found that this works out really, really well, and my color looks really amazing. And this method that I use to do color correction in Lightroom works like about 90%, 95% of the time. I can tell you the 5% where it doesn't work. But I have a preset made. It's called pre-color grade. So what pre-color grade does is that it goes in and it literally eliminates 3 sliders from the equations right away. So we have 6 sliders that adjust colors in Lightroom. So with the pre-color grade slider that I created there, it does a couple of things. So first of all, it pulls the contrast up to 100, and a lot of times I would probably have you guys cringing in your seat right now, like, oh my God, he does contrast at 100. This is crazy. But trust me, it works out. I pull the highlights and a white back at 100 to get the detail. So literally, when I'm going to edit this photo, I'm left with 2 things. I'm left with exposure and shadow, and technically black, but normally I don't even edit the black. So I have simplified a process of editing in Lightroom for any kind of photos, really, down to like literally adjusting the exposure and then adjusting the shadow slider, which is kind of really cool. Now, what I'm going to do here is kind of pull the shadow slider up a little bit and adjust the exposure. Obviously, her skin tone's off, so you still need to go and edit the color temperature and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and adjust that here. Now, the one thing about getting kind of good skin tone in Lightroom, and a lot of what people don't realize about Lightroom is that, Lightroom is a really great image editor, but a lot of times Lightroom has a tendency to interpret any kind of orange color tone, or pretty much any skin tone for that matter, super saturated. So there's 2 ways how I counter this effect, and primarily I'm going to kind of address how I counter the effect on on Nikon and Canon cameras. So if you're on another platform, my recommendation is to kind of do a test. So one of the ways I counteract the effect of the color saturation in the skin is I use the Vibrance slider. So for Nikon, I have the Vibrance set to -10. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'll reset this quickly. So that's the Vibrance as it was, at 0. And then when you do -10, it just takes a little bit out of skin tone just to make it look a little bit better. Obviously less saturated, because I mean, the one thing you don't want is people's skin tone looking way too saturated. Now, I don't have any Canon files to demo here, but if I would have shot with a Canon, I have done that before, what I would do is I would set the Vibrance down to -20, because Canon files with Adobe Camera Raw tends to even have more orange in the skin tone. Now, to get a good color saturation and skin tone, it's not just only that though. I do one more thing as well. And a lot of what I use my tool for is the HSL tool, the hue, saturation, and luminance. So I find HSL a really, really powerful tool in terms of doing skin tone editing, because what happened is, for instance, if a skin tone is way too saturated, what you can simply do is you can come in and you can come and dial down the orange, like so, and that looks a lot better already. I'm going to undo that quickly here. There's a couple of other ways to use HSL. For example, on every single, the hue, the saturation, and the luminance panels we see here. We're going to start with saturation in this case. We see that there is a little color button there. Adjust saturation by dragging this to the photo. Literally, you just click that button. Now you have a target color selector. So you literally hover over the different areas that you want. In this case, we want to hover over her skin tone because we want to desaturate her skin tone. That means like bring the saturation down. So in this case, what I'm going to do is kind of come in here and I'm going to pull the saturation down a little bit. And what it's going to do here is that it's going to control the red and the orange for me as well. So it's actually not just adjusting the primary color, which is orange, but it's also adjusting and working on the adjacent color as well, or the colors that are nearby to that skin tone. This also kind of helps reduce the effect of banding and so forth, but it looks really cool. Now, when you really look at my photos, though, I do a little more thing to it. I have what I call a skin tone formula. It's called Skin DSAT, and trust me, I've used this to all my wedding photos, and it looks great. So again, it's a number. If you want to take that number down, you can. This is an approximate number. So you know, it brings down the red, the orange, and the yellow. But what I found out is this tend to work with majority of the shoots that I do, and it tends to work really well across multiple different file types and so forth. So what we're going to do is, now that you kind of understand a little bit of the basic, a little bit of the fundamentals about the way how I do color editing in Lightroom, let's kind of pick a little more difficult photo. So let's kind of go through here, and we're going to tour our photo a little bit. So one of the photos I'm probably going to use here, well, let's use this one for instance. So this is I travel a lot to do photography lectures and so forth. I always have fun doing that. So in this case, I shot this picture with a model in London, and so what I'm going to do here is pretty much this is shot. I'm going to just kind of share with you the little background technical here. So this is kind of pushing photography in terms of its limitation, kind of up to the brink of what it's kind of really possible in this case. So what I have done here is I'm shooting this at like super low shutter speed, f2.8, 3200 ISO, and still get really sharp and nice shot. There's no lighting on this, you know, beside the environmental lighting. So what's happening to her right now is she's being lit by a street light. So that's perfectly fine, but many times street light tends to go warmer and so forth. So this is kind of my edited version. But let's kind of take a look here a little bit. Now, what I usually do is many times when I do color editing, I don't even come into the develop module to dial things up and down, because that takes a lot more time. It has to generate a preview again and so forth. So a lot of times I would stay in the library. Now, for those of you who want to kind of learn a little bit of a quick Lightroom tip as well, there's this thing called Save Preset. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and apply my color grade, pre-color grade. Now, the formula that I have here, I want to give you a disclaimer that once you make your adjustment this way, the way how I do it, it's a really drastic approach, and you're going to see your pictures going dark and so forth, and it looks really, really scary. But, you know, what we have to do is kind of just focus on the end goal here. And our end goal is to get like really, really great skin tone. This is pretty much the way how you would go about doing it. So the next thing what I would do is I would click on Skin DSAT here, and this is going to bring the saturation of the skin down by a lot. After this, from this point, what I would do is I would come use the exposure just to kind of bring up her skin a little bit, shadow. And then at this point, I would also adjust the white balance as well. If I feel that I need to adjust the white balance a little bit, I can go ahead and do that. So as you can kind of see here. Now this, if I compare this to before and after, it's going to come really close. There we go. Let's go into the library module here. In fact, let's compare all three, just because it could be fun to just kind of look at them that way. So as you can kind of see here, these are all the three versions, but this was the one, this is the very first one that I already pre-edited, and this is literally the edit that I have just done in pretty much, I don't know, less than 10-15 seconds. So obviously you can kind of get really good skin tone like this too, doing from a photo like this very quickly using the formula that I kind of just literally gave you in this webinar. So that's a really great formula to use to do skin tone editing. Now, a couple of things I want to kind of mention as well, and we're going to kind of just focus on this photo here, is that, let's jump back to the develop module here. So something to think about kind of skin tone color correction as well is people's skin tone, what I usually say is that it has a range. So for instance, this skin tone of hers right here, of this model, what I can do is I can literally desaturate it a little bit more, up to your taste, If I want really neutral, I would desaturate this or bring the color temperature down to this much. If I want it a little bit warmer, I want it that much. Generally, I want a little bit more neutral color tones when I'm doing photo editing, when I'm trying to print and so forth. And an important point to really kind of drive home in this webinar as well is that, you know, we're going to be editing a lot on our screen and so forth, and we really think a lot of times that our photos are going to show up mostly on computers and website and so forth, and that's perfectly great, you know, social media blogs. But the other thing as well is you want to always kind of edit with the philosophy that every single picture that you edit, you are trying to make a great, amazing print out of it. And that's kind of the core fundamental that I use and approach in terms of doing color editing here. Is to make sure that I'm actually editing for print, so that my editing is really right on, so that when I print them, the skin tone doesn't look too orange, doesn't look too desaturated, doesn't look too saturated in certain tones. Now the other thing as well, this is where having a really great color calibrated monitor comes in, because what happened is, you know, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a keynote, but our eyes cannot really be trusted most of the time. So what happened is, if we have a color-corrected monitor, a hardware-calibrated display, it makes it much easier to do skin tone corrections and so forth, because you can then correct for a photo. For instance, like this is the exact same model, and I'm going to kind of go through a few of her photos here. Like this is kind of the before version, or excuse me, the after version. I'm going to quickly kind of show you the before. So what we can see here is this is kind of literally all the before photos, all different skin tones. You can kind of see this one is going, because there is a light there on the opposite side. It's glowing kind of like orange, really warm. This one's a little bit more neutral. And you can kind of see that the colors throughout this entire shoot kind of changes her base skin tone a little bit. The end goal of our process, though, of doing any skin tone color correction is to get consistency, so that you look from one photo to the next, and you keep going at it. And, you know, for the most part, I'm going to adjust this a little bit. There we go. Take a little bit of that magenta out. But when you go through the photos, you can look and see as if she's like the exact same person. Her skin tone's exactly the same. Because usually what I say to people is this, especially when I teach these color and skin tone editing classes, is that when you have a person that you're photographing, you know, regardless of what condition you put them in, their skin tone generally does not change. Who they are does not change. The reflection of, you know, their skin tone reflects lights, obviously, so that does change a little bit, but it really doesn't it really doesn't change who they are, how their skin tone is. So that's just kind of something to think about here. There's a few challenging cases I've found in terms of doing color correction, because I was replaying with these photos again. These were literally shot throughout the year, so let's find a difficult situation here a little bit. So, the other thing too is, for instance, you know, let's use this one to look at skin tone color correction a little bit, because I think this is really interesting. Now, this may not look like much, but this is actually, oops, hold on there. Let's go back. There we go. So this may not look like much, but it's literally a result of a picture that was captured really, I keep pressing the wrong button, I apologize for that. There we go. This is a result of a picture that was captured really, really late in the evening. It was 10 seconds, f4, 3200 ISO. I push a lot of boundaries when I photograph, and I do a lot of these things. But what happened is, if you understand the technical part of the camera enough, you can really get a photo like this. So let's kind of adjust this photo here for a little bit, just to kind of show you the formula. So instead of using a save preset here, what I'm going to do is dig into the develop module, so you can kind of see a little bit more of what I do in kind of full view, rather than having me show you by just clicking on the quick develop buttons in the library module. So what I'm going to do is throw these two pre-color grade in. So again, pre-color grade has to do, I literally come in and adjust these three sliders here to contrast, the highlights and the whites to control the tones. I set the vibrance in this case to -10. Again, Nikon files -10, Canon's -20, and if you shoot other brands, you kind of have to do some experimenting playing with it. I know, for instance, my pre-color grade here works really well with Fuji brand cameras as well, so -10 tend to work with Fuji very well. From here, what I would do is I would just go in and I would brighten up the exposure and the shadows a little bit. Now the thing is that, like, for instance, to the untrained eye, this can look like a really good photo. The skin tone looks warm and everything is kind of cool. But generally, what happens again, it's like I said, I don't like color cast. For example, if you take a look there, her dress is really white. So we're seeing a lot of kind of just a warm tone in there in general. So what I'm going to do here is kind of go and adjust the color temperature. And we're going to pull the color temperature down a little bit here. And as you can kind of see, just by doing that, I haven't even adjusted anything else quite as much yet. Let's pull the exposure up a little bit more here. We can get really good skin tone very, very quickly by just using this formula. And one more thing as well, I want to kind of show you HSL. So this is kind of my HSL value. This is the value for saturation. It's -8, -37, -10. You're going to have to kind of find a median where you like this. In terms of hue, I also went and changed that a little bit as well. I find out that if you change the orange skin tone a little bit so it doesn't shift red quite as much, shift a little bit more towards the yellow side, it makes it look much better for printing. So that's kind of something to think about as well. So anyway, so that's the HSL slider, and what I'm going to do here is we're going to do a couple of things here quickly. So I'm going to kind of show you, this is kind of the editing that I've sat down last night and re-edit all these photos, and literally the one that you see here on the right hand side of your screen is the after version, but I'm able to achieve very consistent result by a couple of things. First of all, by applying a formula so I can work through skin tone really quickly, and secondly, by using a color calibrated display. So pretty much what I'm looking at here is if there's ever any doubt, I can always look at the before or the other picture that comes before it and so forth. A good example would be this. This is another photo entirely, so you can kind of see, the pose is different. But if you look at the skin tone, it matches almost perfectly. So to get skin tone consistency, it's not just only knowing how to edit in Lightroom per se to get that, but it's also being able to view your photo on a really, really great monitor so that you don't have to do the guessing work whether this color is reproducing correctly or accurately or not in this case. So anyway, those are a little bit of kind of just, the Lightroom skin tone editing. That's pretty much the main point that I'm trying to get across here. And then what I'm going to do here, let's just take this photo for instance. I like this photo. This is kind of the before and the after a little bit. So we're going to go in here and let's just take the after version and let's see if we can kind of make this picture spruce up a little bit really nicely. So I'm going to adjust the exposure a little bit, do a little bit of shadow, and then literally for this one, what I'm going to do is bring the color temperature down a little bit, and I'm going to increase a little bit of the magenta tint. So just like that. And again, just something to keep in mind too. Like I said, I'm looking at it on a calibrated screen, so it's going to help out a lot. And then you can kind of see beside the shadow and highlight, it comes really close. And generally, I like the one that I just edit just now much better because it's a little bit brighter and everything. But it comes really close if you look at the color. It's really amazing how you can really do that too. It's not just only me. It's not like I have a magic wand or something like that. All right. So what I'm going to do here is kind of jump out of Lightroom just quickly here. And I want to kind of talk about color in general. So we're kind of moving in our second phase of the program here. And we're a little bit more than halfway through at this point. So I want to briefly chat about color. I love color. So I always say this about photography, and as you're probably kind of gauging from my program a little bit, this is kind of my quote for photography. And I always think of photography like this. Photography is the exact science of approximation. Because, out of all the hardware calibrated panels and display I ever worked with, I never found a hardware display I never found a display that actually has a delta E value of 0. that means that there's no color shift whatsoever. I haven't found anything like that yet. So, like I said, photography is the exact science of approximation. And then the other thing we have to think about too is when we're looking at display and when we're looking at a print, we're always looking at two different media. One of them is backlit, one of them is being as a reflective material. So it's all kind of different anyway. But there's a range of it, and we can come close in that. So let's kind of briefly chat about color here. So what and why color? Amazingly enough, we see color, we use color, and interestingly enough, color is all around us. And why we capture color photos in general is because, color photo makes for a very, very wonderful world. And many of us see color. And we have our perception of color, but we do see color. So color makes for a very, very wonderful, very nice world. But what color also does as well is that it elicits an emotional response. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is a picture that's very nondescript, but you feel a lot of things. You feel the hot, the warm, the cold. You feel the movement of it. You feel the constant changing thing. So color elicits a lot of emotional response from us. The thing is that, we all see color. We all see color one way or the other. Most of us do see color. But the thing about color is that while many of us see it, we don't really understand it well enough to just make sure that our color are looking exactly the way how we want them to. So what it really comes down to is that for color photography in general, and what you're really doing a majority of editing on, is that it's the art of deception. What you see is not always what you get. So let's kind of talk about that a little bit. What causes this art of deception? Well, our eyes. Our eyes, one of the best organs that allow us to kind of see into the world. It's so amazing, so fast, and it does so many things. For example, in this slide here, I'm showing you 5 different things that our eyes does. It does chromatic adaptation. So when you walk into a room with a different color, light for instance, it's automatically adapting to that color in the room. It's auto white balancing everything that you look at in real time. It's super fast, super complex. It's very sensory based, but because it's also sensory based, what that means at the same time is that it can be very, very temperamental. So that's kind of something to really think about. So I have a couple of kind of photo riddle here. So what I want all of us to do here is just kind of look at the two surfaces right there. From our eyes, what do we think? Is it the same gray? Is it a different gray? Now, normally in the live room audience, we'll have an answer that's mixed because some of you may have seen this before. But, perceptually to our eyes, what happened is if we just look at those two surfaces, we probably think one is lighter than the other. Amazingly enough, what I'm going to do here is kind of put a little Photoshop mask. Literally, I'm not blacking these out or putting gray screen in my keynote. I'm literally putting like a PNG transparent file on here, and they are, the exact same gray as you kind of see here. So, this kind of tells you a couple things, is that we're not looking at a photo and just looking at colors alone. We're looking at photos and we're defining it contextually, what we're looking at, what we're seeing, how things kind of work, and in context, where is that color sitting. For example, this is a classical X-Rite chart that I really, really love. So you can see there that there's 2 checkers in this case that we're going to focus on, A and B, and amazingly enough, if you look at that, it's a horse move on the chessboard. Kind of really cool. But let's take a look here. Is A and B the same color or the different color? So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to put a mask on here, and let's kind of take a look at that quickly. So once I put a mask on, it is the same color. But when we look at the whole thing, this whole picture, it doesn't look like they are the same color. It doesn't look like they're the same shade of gray. So why is that happening? Well, that's happening because what happened is your brain is looking at this from a couple of things. Your brain is already automatically telling you that that the spot A, or the checkered A and B, they're not in the same spot. There should be alternating colors. So obviously that should be different. And also the green cylinder that was put there, and the way how this block was lit is also very uniquely lit in a way that you don't really think it's the same color. You're not perceiving this as the same color, but they are the same color. Now, for instance, let's kind of blur these two things together. you know, they are the same tone being blurred, but what happened is one of them, you know, is in a kind of the shadow area with fill light, and the other one is just, you know, with light shining on it. So that's kind of what you see the difference between the two. So how do we kind of know we could easily get tricked by this? How do we get precision? It's through the display and calibration. So that's going to be the main thing that we use. So the why and how of it, let's see. So what we see is not always what we get. So what we need to do is we need to remove the guesswork out of our color correction, out of just kind of making a guess by, you know, when we edit in Lightroom, for instance, and just saying, I think this red is going to look, you know, just about right, and so forth. We need to remove those guesswork from it. We need to make sure that we gain color precision, you know, and at the very end of the day, we need to remember that, you know what, we are visual people. That means it's going to be crucial for us to see color, or, you know, to see things more precisely. So precision, how do you get the precision with display? So let's kind of talk about the display here just a little bit. Now, we may not think about display or give display a lot of importance, but it really is important, because guess what? As photographers, majority of our editing is done on the display. We may edit the pictures on an iPhone, on an iPad, and so forth at some point using Snapseed or even Lightroom Mobile. That's really cool, by the way. But, you know, if we're doing production work, majority of editing that we do is done on the display. So there is this need, you know, as a photographer to get really great display, and the best one out there you can get are the hardware calibrated ones. So I'm going to kind of talk about that a little bit more here, and I want to talk about BenQ a little bit as kind of just their overall, as an overall product. Why do I choose to use BenQ, and why do I choose to work with BenQ? I choose to work and use with BenQ because the price per performance ratio. If you haven't looked at our monitor line yet, I'm going to share some of those with you today. Their monitor line is extremely amazing, and what I really love about them is that they're not priced, you know, ridiculously high because, well, we're making a hardware calibrated display, you know, for the pro market, so we're going to price this exorbitantly high so that, you know, you really need to be committed to your colors to get into it. That's not the case. They price their products so sensibly that it's very easy to get into, and I'll share that with you a little bit more as well. The other thing that I want to kind of drive the point home here is that they have a display line which I'm using. It's called SW line, and it is a display line that is made specifically for photographers. It is hardware calibrated. So quickly here, what does a hardware calibrated display mean? So I have this chart showing on here on the screen. So the chart on the left is kind of showing you, you know, for example, a display that's not capable of hardware calibration. So how is the calibration being done then? It's being done using software, using profiles. So you can see there that the chart, the red, green, blue, and the gray tones, they're not quite as smooth as they need to be, because what happened is when we use software calibration, the software is manipulating the color output from our video card. Now, if we use a hardware calibrated display, the cool thing about it is the hardware calibrated display chart's kind of on the right. So with hardware calibrated display, your video card is literally outputting full tonal color range all the time. And what the adjustment is actually being done on the display panel itself. So there's a dedicated hardware in the display adjusting the colors for this. So just to kind of give you a quick analogy, using software to calibrate a non-hardware calibrated calibrated display, it's like shooting JPEG. You're getting compressed tones, you're getting tones that are stretched, you get information that could get thrown away. When you jump onto the hardware calibrated display, it's kind of like you're shooting RAW. You're sending out all the information at once, and you're not manipulating or changing information, but rather you're using a really dedicated piece of hardware, like in our case, when we do editing RAW, we use Lightroom, for instance, to kind of do the number crunching. So the display itself is doing a number crunching in this case. A couple of other things as well is that they come with a shading hood. Love the shading hood. It kind of blocks a lot of stray lights. Inside of it is kind of this black felt. It's kind of really nice. Also, like if you always can touch and feel it too. It's really nice soft material, but it absorbs auto light. It's really cool. So they all come with shading hoods. let's see here. The next thing, it comes with a little hockey puck. So you might not think a lot about the hockey pucks, but I'll do some more videos on YouTube and kind of talk about hockey puck as well and what the advantages is. But one of the things being that, for example, with the hockey puck, I can kind of sit back on my chair and I can control the menus. I can change the different color modes on the display, for instance, without actually having to like reach out or, being right close to the display. So I don't really have to change my viewing distance, less eye strain, and so forth. So that's kind of a really cool thing. And by the way, I don't believe any other pro color hardware calibrated monitor comes with a hockey puck. I could be wrong, but I don't believe that that's the case. Their display panel that they use, they're all 10-bit colors. What that really means in layman terms is that, and especially with, like, for example, the picture you see on the screen in sunset and so forth, you're going to get to see a smoother color transition or smoother color gradient because, the display can display a heck of a lot more color with 10-bit panels. And their display can also reproduce 99% Adobe RGB. Now that's really awesome. sRGB, as you kind of see there, is a little wedge in blue, but Adobe RGB is a much larger color space, and for any panel to be able to display 99% Adobe RGB, I really think that that's super impressive. So I want to kind of talk about my fleet of display a little bit, the BenQ one that I've used, tested, and played with. So BenQ first is the 24-inch PG 2401 PT. This is kind of their first venture into the hardware calibration market, at least for photographers anyway. A couple of notable really good things about here, and all their monitors are going to have this as well, is that the monitor has a hardware calibration built in, and their color reference table, it's a 14-bit 3D LUT. What that really means is that it's a big color reference chart in there. So it's 14-bit, so there's a lot of bit depth. It compares colors in 3D, so that's really awesome. What that really translates to is like super color accuracy that it's hard to achieve otherwise with hardware calibration. So it's not just only the hardware calibration, it's the units inside as well that works really great. The display can display 99% or reproduce 99% Adobe RGB, and the great thing is the delta E value is less than 2. So I'm going to kind of jump to the next slide here while I talk about the delta E value a little bit. So what is delta E value? Well, it's a magic number. No, it's not. Well, delta E value is a variation between color, between what is considered like the standard color and how much your variation is. The general rule of thumb for a good display is that you want the delta E value to be less than 5. So anything less than 5 is considered decent. But as photographers, 5 is not good enough. We need the number to be lower. So anytime you can achieve a delta E value of less than 2, that's kind of telling you that the display can produce super accurate colors. Now, that being said, the delta E value less than 2 sounds really good, but when you really calibrate the BenQ display, many times the delta E value is 0.3, 0.3, 0.5. The lower that number is, the more accurate the color representation is. So this is BenQ 27-inch monitor or display. This is the one that I use, and I'm going to put a little kind of like heart here, like a favorite, because I love this one, and I actually purchased so many of these to use in my studio because it is a really awesome, gorgeous display. It's 2560 by 1440 pixels, pretty much a good, decent amount of pixels to do photo editing on. 99% Adobe RGB, hardware calibrated, has a delta E value of less than 2, has a 14-bit hardware 14-bit LUT, so you can kind of see, the color is really great. But I really love the SW2700 PT. Now, I just really had a chance to play with their new 4K SW320 display, and I've been playing around with it and testing it for a few weeks now, and I really love the display a lot. Now, if you have any questions, you want to see the actual video review, I've posted a video review of the SW320 on YouTube as well, and you can just go into YouTube and just type in BenQ SW320, and you could probably see my review. It'd probably be, one of like a top 5 or something like that of the videos that shows up. And just in case if you want to take this note down, my channel is called Art is Right. So anyway. So this is a 31.5-inch 4K, and it is a huge display, but it can display 4K resolution. It's really awesome. Same attributes as the other one, as all the other monitors that I've shared with you before. But what's really great about this monitor is that, if you're familiar with 4K display, it's really hard to get the color consistency on a very large panel that's displaying a lot of pixels. And what I can say right now is after working with it, it's really just an awesome display, and the color accuracy, it's super awesome. The color uniformity, it's bar none. It's probably one of the best panels out there that I've seen right now. So anyway, this is my fleet of BenQ. So the next thing I want to kind of talk about here in terms of precision, we're kind of reaching about the 80% mark of our program here. I want to talk about calibration. So monitor calibration gives us this. It gives us control. Don't you like that effect? Let's do that one more time. Monitor calibration gives us control. Bam! That's really cool. So there are two category devices that we can use to do monitor calibration. So we can use a colorimeter, or another category of devices is called a color spectrophotometer. And by the way, these are products that are made by X-Rite, but again, I use X-Rite products for more than 10 years now, and they're a really great product. So a colorimeter. This, and in front of us here, we have the i1 Display Pro. Mind you, if you do get the hardware calibrated line of monitors, the Color Monkey wouldn't work with it. You need to get the i1 Display Pro and so forth for you to be able to calibrate the BenQ hardware displays. So they're best for monitors, they're best for projectors, and they're a very, very cost-effective solution. These are not that expensive a device to have, and it's always great just to have one anyway. So what's the difference between a colorimeter versus color spectrophotometer? Well, a color spectrophotometer does more. You can calibrate monitors, you can calibrate projectors with it, but it's really best used for creating a profile for prints, reading color on objects, and so forth. These are where these color spectrophotometer devices really shine. They cost more, generally more than a colorimeter, anywhere between 2 to 4 times as much as a colorimeter. So what you need to do is I would say that you shouldn't really just run out and get a color spectrophotometer. You should really consider your needs. So kind of like the general rule and tip for color calibration that I want to kind of mention is that every display, it doesn't matter which company makes them, most of the display has a luminance value by default, what they call the max luminance of anywhere between 3 to 400 candela per square meter. Well, the problem with that is that's about 3 to 4 times as bright as a typical print. So the proper value to set when you're trying to do a display calibration is setting the candela value to down to about between 80 to 100 candela per square meter, so that you don't have a problem of your display looking a lot brighter than your prints coming back. So, if you set your display brighter, your display, the pictures on the display looks great. When you get the print back, it comes out dark. That's not cool. So what I use here is a colorimeter. I use the i1 Display Pro. I absolutely love this device. This has been, everywhere I go, actually, including when I travel. I kind of travel with this i1 Display Pro. It's really lightweight, but it's a really, really capable little device, and I love this device. So kind of general rule, a few more tips about color calibrating the display is that use a larger or the largest color set patch available. Usually they're small, medium, and large. I generally go with large because more color samples. Generally, it's a pretty good, good indicator of more colors being sampled, the more accurate that is. When you're done with display calibration, I would do what they call Q&A, or not question and answer, but quality assurance. Or what they call the display validation in the Palette Master Elements software, which is a software that BenQ used to calibrate and talk with their hardware calibrated displays. So I would definitely do a quality assurance. Set the tolerance value, the delta E, to 5. If better yet, set it below 2 for the minimum delta E value, so you can kind of just make sure your display is passing those. And if you run your computer, if you're doing calibration on a laptop or on an iMac and so forth, make sure that you disable auto brightness and so forth too, because otherwise that will change the way how the color is being displayed or being calibrated under different lighting conditions and so forth. So like I said, a general rule of thumb is to set the luminance value to 80 candela per square meter. That's 80 to 100. I usually set to 80, and I've been using 80 for more than 10 years now, and it's been great. So a couple of other things here. There's been kind of like some myth that I want to kind of just throw out and just kind of debunk a little bit, is that you don't need to be in an 18% gray room, so not everything needs to be gray. That's not the case. As long as you are in a color neutral room with controlled lighting, that should work just fine. So as long as your screen, the wall behind your screen is not entirely like bright red or bright green, I think you're going to be okay in terms of color editing. So anything with neutral color works fine. It doesn't have to be total white, total black, or anything like that. So just something to think about there. And it's just display calibration. And normally the little hockey puck there would just sit on the display and you can just calibrate it and so forth. So anyway, I just want to kind of give you guys one last anecdote here, is that sometimes I get clients that send us an email that says image is too bright on my screen, or the color doesn't look right, and so forth. And many times, if you're not editing on a hardware calibrated display, if your system and your workflow is not fully color calibrated, you really kind of should think about that. But if you are, you can tell your clients this, that, well, your screen, and in a very nice way, your screen is, you're viewing the pictures in a non-color calibrated environment, that your screens are 3 to 4 times as bright as what we really need to make a good print. And the other thing too is most of the screens that are using now has one of those sensors or cameras or whatever that's constantly adjusting the brightness of the screen to the environment that they're in. And that you're always editing and adjusting the pictures as if you were going to print them. So that's kind of something important to kind of keep in mind, and just to tell people that. So lastly, if you're interested in any of these devices, where can you buy them? Well, you can buy them directly from BenQ.us. You just have to search for the SW320 if you wanted the 31.5-inch 4K monitor. And also on BH Photo Video as well, SW320, you can search there. If you want the SW2700 PT, you can just search SW2700. That will show up as well. But if you're looking for a 4K, I tell you, you can't go wrong with SW320. And you can also, watch my review on YouTube as well. So anyway, we're going to kind of do a quick Q&A now. I'm going to look at a pod to see what questions there are and so forth. Pick a few to answer. Now, if I don't get to answering your questions in the Q&A, or if you have any lingering on questions, what you can do is feel free to send me an email to info@wedding64.com. Kind of just mention that you're in the webinar and so forth, and what we're going to do, what I'll do is I'll answer your question. And if you're ever interested in know more about color, or just want to get color and you want to have a consultation with me, that's something that I do offer as well. But I think that's pretty much it by ways of this webinar. So let's see here. I think all of our questions have been answered so far. Let's see. Dave, you want to maybe jump in a little bit?
Yes, so would you like me to, we have 3 questions here.
Okay.
So would you like me to ask those to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see them in my question pod, so yeah, please do share them with me.
So in the development panel, camera calibration, what camera profile are you using? Is it the default Adobe standard?
Yes, let me kind of just show you that quickly here. So camera calibration is one that I really don't go in and play with as much. Yes, I just use the default Adobe standard. You can come in and change to these other the other settings they have as well. Generally, what I find is that though they could be really cool, you're spending a lot more time just trying to pick what's right. And personally, for me, I'm a tactile person, and you can see that I can edit my photos fairly quickly, just by using the basic panel. So I'd rather just do the basic panel in HSL most of the time to manipulate the color, rather than going in there and trying to select and choose the right profile to use per se.
Okay, that's great. So we have a question from Dennis. He's just basically asking whether you use the color checker passports within your workflow.
I do. So generally, I don't have any samples here to show. What I do is I try my best, and I do try my best to photograph the color checker passport in the lighting environment that I'm in. Many times we, as photographers, we get carried away and we forget to do the color checker passport. But what I found out from using a color checker passport is that color checker passport will kind of create the profile for that specific lighting condition that you have for your photos, which is great. But you still need to come in and do the HSL. You still need to come in and do a little bit of the white balance and the basic panel adjustment in terms of really refining the way how the skin tone is looking. So color checker passport is going to get you much closer to the end result, but at the end of the day, you still need to go and you still need to come in and do these fine-tune adjustment in Lightroom as well.
Sure. So we have a question from Jamie asking, when you were using the pre-color grade preset, do you go back and adjust after setting color temperature or exposure, or do you leave it with contrast plus 100 and whites minus 100?
So all the values, I'll show you a picture here. So for instance, when I have the pre-color grades literally been in development, and it took me about a good 6 months to come up with that formula, 6 to 8 months to come up with this formula for editing. But if you can kind of see here the photos, again, I leave the contrast, the highlights and the white just at minus 100, because if I change any of these variables, it's changing the way how the skin tone looks, and I don't want that. For example, I don't want skin to be necessarily too bright and so forth. So I generally leave these three permanently set so that I only need to focus on the exposure, shadow, and then sometimes I can come in and play and adjust with the blacks. And most of the time, I really just simplify these panel 6 sliders down to 2. And they work, like I said, 95% of the time.
Great, thanks for that, Art. So we have a question from Philip. He says, if we are not doing professional printing, is Color Monkey calibration adequate?
If you're not doing professional printing, the Color Monkey photo, by the way, the spectrophotometer one, should be adequate. But again, if you're getting the BenQ the hardware calibrated line of monitors, I would just recommend that you buy the colorimeter, X-Rite i1 Display Pro. Sorry. Yeah, I would recommend getting the i1 Display Pro because I've been using that on countless monitors now, and it's probably one of the best devices you can buy, especially if you're not going to do any printing. If you want to get into custom profiling, creating your own profile, then yes, you need a color spectrophotometer, in which the Color Monkey photo, it's kind of a really good venture into print profiling.
Sure. So I have a question from Rachel. Was your DSAT skin Lightroom preset for Nikon or Canon?
So the skin DSAT, amazingly enough, I'm going to show you the HSL here. So there's a Vibrance in Nikon's -10, Canon's -20, and you can play around with this. You can come up with your own number. These are these are more of my suggested number, but I'll tell you right now that I've been using this formula for since Lightroom 4, and they work great. But anyway, this is kind of my saturation desaturation value for both Nikon and Canon, and they are the same. So there's no difference in terms of the hue and saturation value for Nikon and Canon. The only thing difference is in the Vibrance setting.
Okay, great. So we also have a question from Tyree. They mention, so you mentioned to set luminance to 80 to 100 for monitor calibration. What determines when to use 80 or when to use 100?
It determines it. That's more of a personal preference. So it would depend on how your prints are coming out. So doing a test print is obviously is going to be necessary, and the environment that you're in. It's kind of the range that I give you. To be honest with you, if you set it to 90, you can't really see that big of a difference. When you set it between 80 to 100, you'll see a little bit more of a difference. But if you want to just pick a safe value to use when you're doing display calibration, 80 would be the best number to set. And I have done so many tests, and I have used this value for more than 10 years now, actually. And I found that 80 is the value that works the best. Anything more than 80 or teetering on the more side, meaning that 100 is getting a little bit to the point where display is just a touch too bright in the print, where 80 it's just about right in line with the print. So that's kind of the case with that.
Great, thanks, Art. We have a question from Ken. He says, the presets you've shown are obviously for skin tones, Do you have other presets for other subjects, such as landscapes, for instance?
The pre-color grade presets work for landscape really well too. I don't have a landscape photo to show because this is kind of a specific, skin tone webinar, but I can tell you right now that this preset works amazingly well with landscape photo. And when I do teach lectures and workshop, I use the same pre-color grade setting for landscape photos as well.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just looking through the questions.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question from Gregory, and he asks, why is Palette Master Element better than I1 Display I1 Profiler software?
It's not better, and it's really two different software that does kind of the same thing. So Palette Master Element is, let me put it this way first. The I1 profiler is designed to do software calibration on the display, like your laptop display, your iMac display, and so forth. The display that are not able to do hardware calibration. Palette Master Element is BenQ proprietary software. What Palette Master Element does is that not only does it create a profile, on your computer, but what it does as well is that it talks to the display. It talks to the panel. It kind of, it's giving the display like the colors and so forth, and is really communicating with the display in real time as you're calibrating it. And that's where the difference between the two comes in. So, for instance, if you're getting the BenQ monitor, any of the SW series line, the hardware calibrated display, you should be using the Palette Master Element software with it because it's going to adjust the hardware luminance and the hardware color in the display. Whereas if you just, if you get the BenQ and you use the I1 profiler with the BenQ monitor, what it's really going to do is just create a software calibration, and you're not going to get the best result from it. So do I use both? Yes, absolutely. I mean, when I use my laptop display, I use the I1 profiler, but when I'm calibrating my BenQ display, I use the Palette Master Element. So they're kind of, like I said, two different software for two, different kind of hardware devices, kind of a thing.
Great, thanks, Art. So we take one last question. This one's from Donald. He asks, are the presets available to download?
The presets are not yet available to download. I'm in the process. I literally just launched my my YouTube channel, so it's as I get those together, as I get the new website to kind of go along with the new branding together, I'm hoping to make these available, at some point in the future, definitely within the year, but hopefully much sooner than that. So at this point, not yet, but I'm not hiding anything here, so you can really just go and take, what I've just showed you in this webinar and apply to your pictures, and they will work.
Great. So I think that's all the time we have for questions, Art.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So yeah, thank you everybody for joining in on the webinar. It's been great. And like I said, this is I'll put up my email info@wedding64.com. So if you have any questions, just feel free to shoot out an email to me, and I'll answer your questions for you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Art, and thanks for the webinar. It was very, very good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for joining.